Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Welcome to Great Shot Kid, the podcast on the Nerd Party Network that looks at the inspirational, technical, and all of the different aspects of filmmaking that you love, the people that bring cinema to life, as it were. I'm John.
And I'm Mike.
And this week we're going to have a roundtable discussion focused on, well, I mean, you know what? Let's just kick it off. Usually we talk about, go to thenerdparty.com/contact if you want to reach out to us. We're facebook.com/thenerdparty. Twitter, we're at Join Nerd Party and the Nerd Party on Instagram. So, well, okay, I guess I did that anyway. So there you go. But in the news recently is beloved geek filmmaker and Star Wars aficionado, Kevin Smith. He recently had a very massive heart attack, a very bad one. He's a spry 47, and despite recent lifestyle changes, has found himself in the hospital with, he called the artery that was blocked the Widowmaker.
I guess that's what it's referred to.
Yeah, it's like the worst one that could happen. So we find ourselves, two geeks of moderate age, heavily influenced by the films of Kevin Smith in one way or another, and him in the hospital. And Mike, I want to get your reaction to that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I woke up to that news this morning, and it freaked me out because, everybody knows that I'm a huge Kevin Smith fan, but he's also of any filmmaker, like the filmmaker who I feel sort of like. Not that I know the guy, but the one who I feel like the most personally connected to, in the sense that I discovered him right when his career started, pretty much. I mean, I watched Clerks a year after it came out, and then Mallrats the day it was released on home video, and I've seen every single one of his movies since before they've opened, and I was obsessed with him in high school. He sort of was my gateway into the sort of indie film world. And the fact that he is exactly 10 years older than me, I've always sort of, charted my life in relation to his, with
sure.
that 10-year window forward or whatever. And the fact that he's so accessible. I mean, with his podcast, but even before that and everything, he certainly presents himself, as an open book. And there's very little that's not known about him, at least as far as his personality and everything. He's not some sort of, reclusive, mysterious filmmaker,
right.
Stanley Kubrick or something.
Right.
Everybody knows everything about him. And, so it's this was shocking for sure. It really was.
It's interesting you say that, though, before I get to my next point is you mentioned how accessible he's always been. And I think that's really interesting because I think he both prefigures and is the perfect representation of the transition into the social age, the social media age, at least. If there's a filmmaker who was ready-made for it, Kevin Smith is it. Because the guy, like you said, he's always been an open book. He doesn't mind talking about his personal life, and that makes him a perfect avatar for the current age.
And he's also someone who's always sort of put himself out there, as a fan before he became a filmmaker, and as someone who, was unafraid to connect with his fans. I mean, I swear to God, this is flat out true story. The way, way, way back in the day, 1997, right, or 1998. He had his comic book store, the Secret Stash, Jay and Silent Bob's Secret Stash, and they would sell things, which you could buy and get shipped around the world. And this is before there was an internet, but you would place a phone order, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And they have the number for the the number that I found. I was placing an order for something, and I call the number, and the phone rings, and it's Secret Stash, and I'm I'd like to place an order, and the person's oh yeah, no, this is for the comic book store. You want to call this number. And I'm like, thanks. And then, they hang up, and I'm like, oh, that was Kevin Smith. He was like literally just behind the counter at his comic book store answering phone calls because that's what he did,
Yeah.
And it's like, I mean, that, and then, just a couple of years later, like we were just talking about, like he was signing at a convention and they were supposed to cap the line. He was going to sign for an hour. And they capped the line, and I was at the very end of this line, and he stayed and signed for like every single person. He stayed there for 3 hours signing for everybody. And it's like just that sort of like dedication to fans before the internet, before social media and podcasting and everything. Like you're saying, it does spill over, and it's definitely part of his mythology and everything,
And it's the thing that really, really, I hate admitting when I'm wrong or when it's been a bit or anything like that. But it's well known for the last several years that I, sort of, I thought playfully, but, I've sort of been hard on Kevin Smith about the nature of his career and the trajectory of his career. And it's always been sort of like, it's not because I dislike the guy. I've always prefaced it with he seems like a nice enough guy. But the thing that I have to always take my hat off with him is two things. One is beyond the, he's in it for the fans and everything, is the fact that the guy always seems to have been in it, the phrase we love to use, for love of the game. Like he's just thrilled to be doing it. And he is in fact wonderfully humble and self-effacing. I can always respect that. Where somebody will give him crap or be like, your movie sucks. He's like, yeah, okay. Like he has a very good attitude about things. But I'll also give him a lot of credit for the fact I don't think that there's anybody that can take more credit for being the one to make Star Wars conversations cool. Like he comes up around the same time that Tarantino does, right? And Tarantino's dialogue is legendary. And Tarantino has these beautifully scripted monologues about Madonna's Like a Virgin, or about the AK-47 and Jackie Brown, or the justice system and Hateful Eight. But there are these beautifully crafted social commentaries. But Kevin Smith, as much as I hated Clerks 2, so I'll go back to an earlier film of his, but like Clerks kicks it off. Clerks makes those kind of weird, quirky, Star Wars specific things cool to talk about in public. It makes it okay. He really is, in that sense, like a trailblazer for the nerd conversations, for the nerd renaissance that comes up in the 1990s. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it at least.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I mean, it's weird because like that's why I watched Clerks in the first place, because I was working at a comic book store, and I had a friend who was older who had seen Clerks because he was, studying film, and he was into indie film, and here this conversation about Star Wars comes up or whatever, and, he's talking about it, and I'm like, that sounds interesting. I'll check out this movie, this little black and white thing, sure. And, there's that conversation there, which was the centerpiece of the movie for me, and everything sort of branched out from that. And it's crazy because, like, you see, like, if you look really, really closely, you can see a couple comic books, like, stacked up in the corner of one shot, but there's really nothing to indicate that he is a comic book fan, and then he releases Mallrats a year later, which is all about comics, and that, and I think part of it was like, it's really weird. Like his relationship with Star Wars is like I remember seeing him at a convention right after Episode 1 came out, and someone's like, "What did you think?" And he's like, "It's good. It's fine. I wasn't over the moon about it, but whatever, it was fine." And then, he started talking about Star Wars in general, and he was like, "I'm not really that big of a Star Wars fan." He's like, I put it in the movie because I thought it was a funny conversation, but, in reality, like, Empire is a nearly flawless film. I love that movie, but I could live the rest of my life without seeing A New Hope again, and I would die a happy man. That movie's fine, but I'm not in love with it. Yeah. And I think a lot of it is like nostalgia for him, but he's not like super duper Star Wars crazy fan, but he sort of like I think he played into that persona,
Oh, well, I mean, it worked for him. You know, it definitely worked for him. But I mean, he does gear shift in Mallrats to the comic book centric, and I don't think he looks back after that. I really don't.
I mean, there is the Star Wars conversation, and or a few, you know, there's the whole Jedi mind trick thing in Mallrats, and Chasing Amy has the wonderful conversation with Hooper X at the beginning about the nature of Darth Vader.
And see, here's you know what's funny about that is that conversation had me in stitches. It still has me in stitches. Chasing Amy also came along at a time in my life where I was actually infatuated with somebody named Amy. So I was like, this is relatable. It really wasn't. But the thing is that Hooper X conversation will always go down for me as the gold standard moment for how to construct semi-controversial comedy. Like if you peel apart that thing, it's not just about the Star Wars. It's about the fake persona that any creator puts on in order to play. I mean, if anything, you could actually argue that the whole conversation, both sides of it, are Smith working out the fact, like you just said, he's not the biggest Star Wars fan in the world, but he's going to own it because that's what people remember him for. And it's so funny to me because after all of the movies that he's made, that is still the first thing that pops into my mind is that conversation in Clerks. He'll never escape it. It's always going to be with him for the rest of his life.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, certainly, I mean, he is, I mean, there's the whole story that he's told on a few occasions now about visiting the set of Episode 7 and everything like that, which is really great. And you can tell from that, yeah, Star Wars is something which is very important to him in his life, but, you know, how much of that is because it helped launch his career? I don't know. But,
well, he actually did, because the thing is, he also garnered somewhat of a reputation for being a willful critic of the prequels. And then I remember when and this is probably the source of my having a bone to pick with him, or the bone, this is the bone that I've picked, or whatever, is after he did this whole, where he basically becomes an avatar, especially with his show. I never saw the show, but I know that there was an episode where he was really critical of the prequels or something. They like put Lucas on trial or something like that.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, I think that was done for comedic effect.
Oh, it was definitely done for comedic effect. But the thing is, that sort of changes his persona as like, yeah, he's the champion of those of us who didn't like the prequels, you know, as much as the originals and everything. And then he appeared in Star Wars Insider for, I'm trying to remember, I think it might have been Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, where he started talking about how great it was what the prequels did for innovating film and all of that stuff. And I remember reading it and thinking, wait a minute, you're the guy that's known for trashing the prequels, and now you're in here praising what the prequels did. I was like, dude.
I don't think he's really known for trashing the prequels. I mean, every time that I've heard him talk about, I don't know. I mean, maybe he did like a comedy bit or something like that, but every time I've heard him talk about the prequels, like, you know, earnestly, he's always been like, they're good. You know, they're fine. You know, I saw something just recently where he was talking about them, and he was basically saying, like, you know, they're not for me. You know, like Star Wars, you know, the original trilogy was for me, and, you know, I wasn't a kid when, you know, the new ones came out. I was, you know, 29 years old, and, you know, you cannot recapture that magic that you had when you were, you know, 7 or whatever. So, you know, they're not for me. But, you know, I can totally understand people liking them. Like, I've never seen him, like, trash the prequels. You know, I mean, he might have made some jokes about them for sure, you know, because they're an easy target. But he's, every time I've heard him, like, someone ask his opinion of the prequels, he's always been like, yeah, they're fine, you know?
You know, but speaking of, they're fine. Okay, take me on, because the thing is, you are a Smith fan, and this is something that you and I have gone back and forth about. Okay, and this is, I guess, somewhat reminiscent of our Carpenter conversation, but maybe flipped it a little bit, where I'm like, Kevin Smith is good up until and possibly including Dogma, or his films are enjoyable to me up to and possibly, like, half of me is willing to include Dogma, and the other half is kind of like, but specifically before anybody thinks it's, oh, well, that's just because John was raised Catholic. And no, it's because I actually think that everything he left on the cutting room floor, which was included in that special edition DVD, if that had been in the movie's better. Like, I had a problem with actually just the movie in general, how it was structured and stuff like that. But I don't think I'm alone in saying that I stopped going to his movies. But what is it that's kept you a fan about Kevin Smith? What has kept it powered for you?
I mean, I guess in a lot of ways it's the same thing that keeps, anything, whether it's Star Wars or George Lucas or, anything powered for me, which is like, I'm never going to forget that he made Clerks, and because of that, and also the fact that, since I do kind of like think of being with him from the beginning, I mean, in high school, I was the biggest Kevin Smith fan on the planet. My entire life revolved around Kevin Smith, and it sort of became my goal to sort of like introduce him to everyone who I came into contact with. And like, I could literally recite every single line of dialogue from every single one of his movies. If he directed a commercial, I sought that out. If he, wrote a comic book, I sought that out. And it was like, I mean, I was just starving for anything that he would do. And, that's carried over. I mean, that's carried over throughout. So now it doesn't matter what he does. Like, I will be there opening day to see it, As far as the quality, though, okay. I mean, I've liked every single Kevin Smith movie except for his last one, Yoga Hosers. That's the first time I saw a Kevin Smith movie, and I was like, ugh, this does not work at all. The only other, what was it?
The first time. There was
the first time. The
early.
only other one that sort of falls into that is they did a cartoon movie, Jay and Silent Bob. Oh God, I don't even remember the name of it now, which is crazy.
Yeah,
that movie, that animated movie, was terrible. He wrote that, but he didn't direct it, so that doesn't really count. But yeah,
I didn't even know there was an animated Jay and Silent Bob movie.
I
didn't even know that.
It was a He basically what happened was he wrote it it was supposed to be a comic book, and Jason Mewes, who at the time was I think kind of just starting his recovery from drug addiction. I mean, they do that podcast, Jay and Silent Bob Get Old, where basically it's a comedy show, but it doubles as basically an AA meeting for Muse. Every show, starts or ends with him talking about how many days he's been sober and everything. And that the first 10 episodes of that show are basically the story of Muse's, struggles with substance abuse leading up to, the creation of that podcast. It's really, really interesting. It's kind of devolved into just, I mean, that's not one of my favorite Kevin Smith podcasts, I have to say, but those first few episodes were amazing. But
well, I'll have to check those out. But now I have a question though, because okay, you're willing to admit Yoga Hosers wasn't great and the Jay and Silent Bob cartoon wasn't great. What is it? Because the thing is, everybody knows from listening to this, from listening to us over on Stage 9, from listening to us over on Commentary Trek Stars, or anywhere else that they've heard you speak, how incredibly informed and knowledgeable and whatever you are about the filmmaking process, about lenses, about types of film, about digital filmmaking, about all of the technical stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if there's a knock that I think can fairly be universally applied to Kevin Smith, it's that his specific direction, per se, has never been the strong suit of his films. Would you agree with that?
Well, to a point. I mean, I definitely think that that's true of his early work. And, that was sort of the joke. This guy can't direct his way out of a paper bag. All of his movies look like garbage and everything. And that, I think, was true early on, and you could say, he went through cinematographers like crazy, basically because the studio kept on saying, like, you need to get someone who actually knows how to shoot a movie, right?
Yeah.
And I think what's happened over the course of time, I mean, I would say starting with Clerks 2, really, is when he really starts to develop his own visual language. I mean, you look at like Zack and Miri, you look at Cop Out and everything like that, and Red State, I mean, is amazingly directed, you know, and the same is true for his cinematographer, Dave Klein. Like, he shot the first 3 movies, and then when they went to do Dogma, the Weinsteins were like, you need to get a real cinematographer this time. So they had to go tell, you know, their cinematographer, we are getting to make Dogma, but you can't do it. And they paired him up with Wes Anderson's cinematographer. And honestly, the results are not very good, you know?
No,
and,
not particularly.
And Klein was like thrown off to the side for years. He didn't come back until until Clerks 2. So there was like there was Dogma, and then Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back was shot by Jamie Anderson or something like that, who's like he does a lot of comedies and stuff. And then they gave him Vilmos Zsigmond for Jersey Girl, the guy who shot Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And, you know, okay, yeah, that movie looks great, but they talk about like how their relationship with him was terrible because basically he was extremely condescending to them because he's like, I shot Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and your movies are known for looking like garbage. And it was very much a generational rift there.
But then, you know what? That actually sounds like what happened with Gilbert Taylor and George Lucas on Star Wars.
Yeah, I can see
Gil
that.
Taylor was like, okay, settle down, kid. And Lucas was like, no, that's not how I want to like the scene. Yeah.
But then, you know, when they went back to Clerks 2, the whole thing was going back to their roots and everything like that. So he's like, now I'm bringing in Dave Klein again, you know, and that movie looks great. You know, Zack and Miri look great. And the thing that happened in that time is Dave Klein, you know, the guy who gets pushed aside, he's like, okay, fine. I'm going to use this time to learn my craft and to become a quote-unquote real cinematographer. And now his day job is he's the cinematographer on Homeland. And he's been nominated for multiple Emmys.
Okay, see, I have stopped watching Homeland since the third-ish season, but that show always looked great. Was he there from the beginning? Because that show was solid looking.
He's been nominated for Emmys, and I mean, you look at Red State, and it's like, wow.
Okay, so talk me back then. All right, because I after Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, I walked from Kevin Smith movies, and then I rented Clerks 2, and I was done with Kevin Smith after Clerks 2. I was just completely flat out done with him.
Okay,
talk me back. If you're saying to because I don't think that I'm unique. I don't think that I'm unique. That I made it to a certain point with Kevin Smith, and I was just like, I just can't do this anymore, man. Talk me back. What's the one post Clerks 2? You think it's Red State that's going to bring me back? That's going to make me say, "Hey, this is pretty cool. I like what you're doing here." Or is it Zack and Miri? What is it that's going to bring me back?
Zack and Miri feels very much sort of like in the vein of Clerks 2. Like I almost see Clerks 2 and Zack and Miri as being sort of like two sides of the same coin. In a lot of ways.
Not selling me on it.
Very close together and everything. I mean, Zack and Miri is essentially the story of the making of Clerks, you know? Just
okay.
Yeah, I mean that's what it is. I mean, it's flat.
Okay, now you are selling me on it. Okay.
It's not even, you know, hidden, you know, that's what that's supposed to be. But at the same time, it's like, well, that's a great sort of personal story, and it's a very touching, you know, romantic comedy, and it's very funny and all that stuff. But it is maybe lacking in some of the substance of his other movies. Cop Out, certainly an interesting thing. You know, the fact that it's, I mean, a huge, a mid-level studio film, which he didn't write, starring Bruce Willis and Tracy Morgan. You know, I mean, it's a bizarre thing, but it has some problems, for sure. And I don't think you can throw those problems on Smith. The problem, obviously, was Bruce Willis.
Now, see, here's what's interesting is this is another thing that I think probably contributed to my, I don't know, they're not attacks because I'm nothing to Kevin Smith, but like my willing takedowns of Kevin Smith to anybody that would listen to them is that when he was working on Cop Out, reading the articles, and he's like, oh, it's so great working with Bruce Willis. He's an idol. I love him so much, and I loved him on Die Hard 5000 or whatever it was that I worked, blah, blah, blah. And then afterward, he comes out, and on his speaking tour, he's like, he's a total douche. And it's like, dude, like, we kind of know. We kind of figured that out, but come on, man. I don't know. I don't like the magicians who, that's what it is. He's like the magician that comes around and tells you how the other magicians did the trick, but not in a Penn and Teller sort of way. Like the Penn and Teller sort of way is a lot of fun to like have them walk through the trick and explain to you how they're going to do it and how they pulled it off and everything like that. But Kevin Smith is almost like like Statler and Waldorf on the Muppet Show, where it's like, no, there's the string right there. Look, see, oh, there's the shadow. Like that's sort of the thing where it's like, you don't need to come out and like, I'm sure that John Peters probably has had a conversation or 5,000 in his life that he's not happy about having. But you don't need to like put the guy out to dry for the conversation about Superman that you had,
I guess that's true, to some extent. I mean, I think that, obviously he's very open about these things, and I think part of it is that they're his stories to tell, or whatever, but I mean, it is I mean, I think most of the stuff is kind of lightweight, I mean, the Bruce Willis stuff, yeah, he tells it like it is, but, Bruce Willis did kind of ruin his movie for him. So, I mean, I get that to me kind of makes it fair game. I don't know. But, I mean, he doesn't really do that with other filmmakers or like, people where it's not his story to tell, you know what I mean? I mean, occasionally you'll hear little sort of things like that are, but they're nothing, major. Like, I mean,
look, I think I just come from a different school because, and I'll relay this story, okay, in a very nebulous way because you never know who's listening out there. But I had a boss one time who was awful, absolutely terrible to me. And terrible to everybody that worked for this person. Notice I'm not even saying he or she here, right? Totally terrible, whoever worked for this person. This person was so bad, and you've known me for many years, Mike. This person was so bad, I actually had to go excuse myself to go to the bathroom to have a rage cry after a meeting. Like one of those things where it's like I'm either going to cry or I'm going to start punching walls in the office sort of thing. But I never once ratted this person out. I never once torched the bridge on the way out with HR or anything like that. Now, one school of thought would be I should have, right? But I come from the school of thought where it's like you never know how that's going to go down in the future, right? Example, I met this person later down the road, and I don't know whether they had reformed or not, but there was this sort of unspoken thing where the person was totally aware that I could have made their lives very difficult, and there was a great appreciation that I gave them the chance to redeem themselves, right? Now, obviously, they weren't doing anything criminal or anything like that. Like it's not on that level. Kevin Smith tells this story about John Peters. John Peters is never going to work with him again. Bruce Willis is never going to produce a movie of his. Like it seems unwise to me to torch your relationship with Bruce Willis or John Peters or anybody else that you're going to trash talk in public on stage for laughs. You know what I'm saying?
I guess so. I mean, the thing that I think of in that regard is like, he probably doesn't want to work with that. I mean, like at one point, like
touche, fair point.
I was at a Q&A and someone asked him like, are there people who you don't get along with? Is there anyone who you worked with who you don't get along with? And he's like, yeah, there are. I'm not going to say who it is, but you can probably tell because it's the people who I haven't worked with again, And, I mean, that's fair, I mean, I don't know.
That is a fair comment, yeah.
And I mean, the things that he says are not anything which I think would make it difficult. Like Kevin Smith is not going to take down John Peters, right? I mean, it's not like anyone's going to be like, I don't want to work with John Peters anymore, but.
Well, that's true, and to that point as well, I guess, is the fact, because you pointed to the fact that Rian Johnson talked to Kevin Smith, and he said, "So what was it like working with Bruce Willis?" Because of Looper, and Rian Johnson was like, "He was great. I liked him." Yeah, like we talked about that before. We're like, Rian Johnson's like, I didn't have a problem with him.
Yeah.
And so but the thing is, that just sort of like, and the thing is, I don't want to kick the guy while he's in the hospital or anything like that. But, like it's that sort of instance where I'm like, well, the common factor in all of these stories is you. Is it possible that you're doing something just to tick all of these people off?
See, I mean, I don't think so. Because if you look at that and you look at like the ratio, I mean, just like you're saying how you have, people who you've had trouble working with, I certainly have had people who I've had trouble working with, but it's a rare occurrence, and you look at how many people have come back to work with him again and again and again, and you look at, I mean, to me, it's not even the stuff that, I mean, it's not, like, the thing that to me signals the fact that, like, Kevin Smith is such a good guy or whatever, and all this stuff is everything that everyone else says about him, like when he's not there, I mean, whether it's stories about, how he interacts with, Make-A-Wish kids, or whether it's, stories from like the crews of Flash and Supergirl talking about how, they just want him to keep coming back because he's such a joy to work with, like those things. It's like,
that is fair. You're absolutely right. That's fair. Maybe what it is we are the HR department, right? And maybe his story about John Peters doesn't do anything, but like maybe him telling his story about Bruce Willis will demand other directors to expect better behavior on a set.
Maybe.
For them to say, I heard about the way you behaved, that's not going to fly here, or something like that.
Yeah.
Maybe.
And he's, to be fair, he's by no means the only person who's been, he's the most vocal person, but he's by no means the only person who's, talked about Bruce Willis being terrible, right?
This is true. This is true. And that's sort of the, I don't know, I guess that gets to the whole sticky wicket of personalities. And I mean, actors at their core are insecure, and oftentimes terrible people. And so maybe that just speaks more to, that mold of actor or something like that. But I'm not going to stop watching Die Hard. I'm not going to stop watching Die Hard because of it. So,
and and he's talked about like it kind of sucked because he's like, I'm a huge Die Hard fan, and now I can't watch that movie anymore because all I see is the guy who gave me an ulcer. You know what I mean? Yeah. Which is, I mean, that's certainly, something which people experience. I mean, we were just kind of talking about that with Quentin Tarantino or whatever. Just the idea of separating the art from the artist and never meeting your idols and all that stuff. And, I mean, it can definitely
people are
be a
complex,
problem.
right? I mean, that's the thing, I guess. And I guess at this point, what I will do is very publicly forswear. I'm going to stop my whole thing of like, Kevin Smith seems like a nice guy. I wish him well. I'm legitimately glad that they caught this, that he didn't die. Because 47, and honestly, anything less than 5 billion years is too young, but he's way too young. And not just because he's less than 10 years older than me. So, hey, no, I don't want that. No.
Yeah.
So, like I publicly forswear and recant all of the things that I said for, comedy or whatever. I do. I turn a corner here with Kevin Smith, but I still ask for those of us that left after Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, very willingly and very justifiably, I would say, and especially after Clerks 2, what movie gets us back into Kevin Smith? What movie would you assign people, and maybe we can make this an assignment for people to watch? What movie would you assign people to watch to get back into Kevin Smith that is not Clerks, Mallrats, or Chasing Amy, or Dogma?
I mean, it's a very clear answer, but it's also something which is very sort of like outside of the box in terms of him, which is why I think it's such a clear answer. Is Red State.
Okay.
Hands down, Red State. I think if you were to look at it on any sort of reasonable scale, Red State is the best movie that he's made since Chasing Amy. I mean, certainly the best directed movie he's ever made. I mean, but also it's so unlike everything that he's done before. I mean, yeah, there's some chuckles in it, right? But it is a hardcore, straight-up horror movie from beginning to end. But it also has, these amazing performances. I mean, Michael Parks in particular is awesome. John Goodman is awesome in this movie. And it has, an important message. It's timely, and it's a tour de force, and it's something, but it is so unlike everything that he's done before. I mean, he I went to see it because he took it around the country on a tour where he would show the movie and then do a Q&A afterwards, and he came out to introduce it, and he's like, we're going to have a Q&A afterwards because you're going to watch this movie and you're going to be like, oh my God, Silent Bob, what happened to you? Because it is so heavy and so, so dark. It's so dark and so violent and everything.
Okay.
But it really does show his range because it's unlike anything he's done before. No resemblance at all to any other Kevin Smith movie aside from a few little jokes,
Okay. So, all right then. I will take up that challenge. I will take up the Pepsi challenge. I will watch Red State. I will give him another chance. I will let this be, if I like this, then I will dabble in Zack and Miri and what is it? Cop Rock? What's the name of it?
Cop Out. It was originally supposed to be called A Couple of Dicks, but then they were like, no, we can't call it.
If they weren't going to let Zack and Miri make a porno fly in certain markets,
yeah,
I have a feeling A Couple of Dicks was not really going to work.
So then it was going to be called A Couple of Cops, that and then they finally came up with Cop Out because they were like, oh, if we called A Couple of Cops, that's just a cop out, and then they're like, oh, that's good, Cop Out. But no one ever talks about this, but at one point it was definitely going to be called Detectives in Charge because and I know this because working at a movie theater, at one point we get our pack of trailers, and I see this thing. It says Detectives in Charge, and I'm like, what the hell movie is that? And I just throw it on the screen to see what it is, and it's the trailer for Cop Out, only with the title Detectives in Charge. So it came really freaking close to being called Detectives in Charge. Trailers went out. I saw one.
That's amazing. That is amazing. Okay. All right. Red State. Red State is the one to go for. And the thing is, I'm hip for seeing Red State because Michael Parks is just
he's
brilliant.
Awesome in this.
I haven't seen him in this, but he's just a brilliant actor. He was a brilliant actor. Rest in peace.
Tarantino, I think, was the one who said that this was his best performance ever,
Which is crazy considering the guy sitting in for Ricardo Montalban, beats him out for the part because he's just so good that that Tarantino was like, yeah, you got to play it.
Yeah.
That's...
And it's great that he
good.
kind of gets a starring role here. I mean, I would say it's a very interestingly structured movie where the perspective... I mean, we talk about gear shift movies. This thing shifts gears 3 times to the point where you have no idea where it's going. And then it gets to the end and you're just like, are they really going to do this? Are they really going to do this? And It's amazing. And
right.
for anyone who's interested, if you want to... this is one of the most amazing podcasts I've ever heard. They did he did a podcast series. It was called Red State Film School or something like that, where what he did was leading up to the release of Red State, he had like a podcast series at his Smod Castle, where each week he had a different crew member come in and talk about what they did on the making of the movie. So he
Oh
had
my gosh.
everyone from like casting directors to assistant directors to costume designers to cinematographers, and then he finished it off with, I think Michael Parks was the very last person who he came, and it's kind of awesome. Like, he had the same group of people come each time, so it literally he wanted to design it like it was a film school, and that's what it became. And it's one of the most insightful, sort of like I don't know, anything, any in any format. One of the most insightful descriptions of the filmmaking process, and I highly recommend listening to it. I don't know why I'm promoting other podcasts for people to listen to, but whatever.
You know why? Is because you should. I mean, like, we're not. I mean, what kind of competition are we in here?
No, that's
like,
true.
we want.
Yeah.
I mean, like, our whole mission statement is to get people to learn about film, and if there's a great resource for that. And this is not nested within the Smodcast. Like, if I go searching for it, I should search for Red State Film School.
I think that's what it was called. I mean, it's
Okay.
going to be like, if you go to smodcast.com and search Red State, I'm sure it'll come up. I forget the exact name of it, but yeah, it was like its own separate thing.
So let's do this, okay? Next week, we're going to talk about RoboCop 2 with a special guest, because I'm going to especially enjoy curb stomping RoboCop 2, a movie that I have a legendary problem with. A few weeks down the road, because we're going to do a Rebels recap after that season is wrapped up and everything, a few weeks down the road to give you guys time to prepare, and we will remind you next week and the week after that as well. Watch Red State, and then find this podcast that Mike has referenced, and let's all do our homework so that we can come back and reconvene and talk about this, because as it so happens, Mike and I were talking about going back and revisiting the filmography of Kevin Smith, Godfather of Star Wars conversations in film and geek culture and everything like that. And so this seems like the perfect time to go back and, so RoboCop 2, Rebels recap, and then we're going to talk about Red State, so you have plenty of time to watch the film and listen to that podcast, and we'll come back and reconvene on that. But, Mike, if people want to talk to you about, Kevin Smith or anything like that, where can they find you online?
You can find me on Twitter at Mumbles3K.
And you can find me on Twitter at Kessel Junkie, or you can amble on back here and listen to Aggressive Negotiations, which is a podcast focused on the nooks and crannies of the Star Wars English Muffin. And that's here on the Nerd Party Network, and, of course, on Words with Nerds. So next week, we will be talking to you about Irving Kershner directing RoboCop 2.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.